Anyway, well, no, I don't. Yeah. Good afternoon. Before I introduce the speaker today, I have a couple of announcements. First, sure, I know most of you know that Monday we're having Daniel Serwer back with us at noon, so don't forget that. And especially Wednesday night, we have Adam Michnik coming. He's a really world-class Democratic leader, and he is amazing, and he's coming with Elżbieta Matynia, who has just done a book on his conversations with Václav Havel, which led up to Solidarity and the Velvet Revolution, so I think you won't want to miss that. I have a sad announcement, too. Our dear friend Clement Price died yesterday. He had a stroke on Sunday, and he just didn't come out of it at all. So we'll think about him a lot today and throughout, because he's been such a joy to Schemel members with his talks on universities for a day and others. So think of him today, anyway. Now, I personally have had a very special relationship with the subject of today's lecture, the East African country of Rwanda, beginning with Stephen Kinzer's book, A Thousand Hills, being selected as a freshman read several years ago at this university. Around the same time, with distinguished alumnus Michael Fairbanks, I traveled to Rwanda to conduct a roundtable discussion among academics on the role of the university in strengthening democracy and the culture of civil society. My impressions of the nation then, in 2008, only 14 years past its genocide, have had a profound impact on me, and I continue to wonder at its people, their ingenuity, their courage, and their capacity for adopting a forward-looking mindset, and their leader, Paul Kagame, for overseeing, inspiring, and accepting the rise of people power in that country. So impressed have I been that I have now been in Rwanda 8 more times after that first and have produced 2 Rwanda-specific books. Notwithstanding the unparalleled success that Rwanda has experienced, economically, politically, socially, and culturally, there's an ongoing controversy, not only about the manager of the Hotel Rwanda, but its president claiming that he was responsible for the genocide. I'm in no position to comment on either, as I don't know the facts. We're here today to hear from somebody who does know some facts, Kerry Zukus, what he knows about the facts behind the story as told in the film Hotel Rwanda, and perhaps some insights into controversies that are still with us today. Today's speaker, Kerry Zukus, has co-written a book with a Rwandan survivor, Edward Kayihura, that tells a different story about the manager of the Hotel Rwanda. They are not the first to deny the veracity of the story as told in the film Hotel Rwanda, but we may not have heard it before. So please join me in welcoming Kerry.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Scranton. It's great to be here. This is a semi-homecoming for me because I was born and raised right down Route 81 in a little town called Frackville, Schuylkill County. So, to me, Scranton was always the big city. So, and I haven't been back in a while, but you're looking good. So, keep up the good work. As was stated, I am the co-author of this book, Inside the Hotel Rwanda, The Surprising True Story and Why It Matters Today. And during my talk, I hope to illuminate why the true story may be, in fact, surprising, and also why it should matter to us today. This project was 7 years in gestation, so we put an awful lot of work into it, Edward and I. Edward, right here, is a survivor who managed to stay alive during the 1994 genocide, which is now known as the genocide against the Tutsi of Rwanda, as opposed to the Rwandan genocide, which was what it was initially known as worldwide. Edward did seek solace within the Hotel Milcolin, which became later known as the Hotel Rwanda when Hollywood made a film about it. The Hotel Milcolin is the biggest, nicest hotel in Kigali, which is the capital of Rwanda. Edward approached me 7 years ago, and my full-time occupation is author. I've authored my own books, but I also have co-authored other books, and I'm also a professional ghostwriter. So in one form or another, I've been responsible for 45 published books over the course of my career, though you could probably only find my name in a handful of them, on a variety of topics. So it was in this sense that I was initially approached by Edward through an agent. And Edward told me that he most certainly was not looking for a ghostwriter, but rather a full American co-author. And the reason was twofold. One was he felt he needed the assistance because English is his fourth language. And I'm quite impressed with anyone who speaks that many languages, period, let alone judging the quality of their ability to communicate in any one of them. I struggle enough just with English. But in Rwanda, it's very common that your first language you learn is Kinyarwanda, which is their national tongue. Also, being African, they tend to learn Swahili, which is kind of a universal language in Africa, used mostly in military situations, kind of like the way we use Morse code here. The other language you learn when you go to school in Rwanda is French. It's because the last colonial power was Belgium, and Belgians speak French. That's their primary language. If you go to secondary school, though, in Rwanda, you will also learn English. So again, that's why it says number 4. But the other reason he said was, he said, I don't believe in the concept of ghostwriters. This is going to be a very controversial book, and I want to make sure I have all my cards on the table right from the start. And in that sense, I want to make sure that everyone knows, yes, I did get some help with this, and I also want to be able to lean on your expertise with regards to putting together a good book and doing some research with me and so on. And so, again, I'm fully credited on this book. Edward, in my first meeting with him, said, have you ever seen the movie Hotel Rwanda? I said, yes, I loved it. And I really did. I think it's a very, very well put together film. It's very entertaining. He said, well, what if I told you, A, I was there, and B, 99% of the movie is completely untrue? And I was quite taken aback. Now, why was I taken aback? Well, here's the actual movie poster. Hotel Rwanda, and what does it say right underneath? No qualifying statements there, are there? You will see with Hollywood films things like based on a true story, inspired by a true story. They didn't do that with this film. A true story. No equivocation. And so, going in, I checked my brain at the door and believed I was seeing a true story. This is a problem. Even when we have the equivocations and Hollywood films are brought into classrooms, we have some problem here. Hollywood movies were never meant to be used in classrooms. And yet, despite that, Hotel Rwanda is probably found in almost every college and every high school in America, used as a teaching tool. Now, what the film got right, according to Edward, is that yes, it does depict that there was a genocide in 1994 in Rwanda. That's true. And it was there are 2 major tribes there. There's actually 3. The Hutu, which is the majority, the Tutsi, which is the next largest, which makes up about 10 or 11% of the populace. There's also a third we don't talk too much about. It's called the Twa. The Twa we actually know by an Americanized name, which is Pygmy. So if you ever wonder where Pygmies are from, Pygmies are the Twa, and they are from Rwanda. What happened in 1994, which the film captures correctly, was, again, there was a genocide, and it was the Hutu majority that took up arms against the unarmed Tutsi minority. There was also a civil war going on at the time. Again, this is, I believe, depicted in the film rather accurately, between the RPF, which was a rebel force of primarily Tutsi that were in diaspora in Uganda, where they had been driven in the late 50s, early 60s, and then again in 1973. The problem there was they had been just simply wanting to return. The dictatorship in the nation was not allowing for that return. And so they unfortunately had to try to get back in militarily. And what happened shortly before the 94 genocide was, after some incursions and some military conflicts, a treaty was signed called the Arusha Accords, which was supposed to allow for power sharing and allow for the Tutsi who had been living in diaspora to come back into the country. Unfortunately, for a lot of very hardline Hutus, all this meant was now there was a good excuse to try to exterminate all Tutsi, those that were already there as well as those that were coming in, which happened in April of 1994. A little bit of background history there. But back to Hotel Rwanda. So what is untrue about it? I mean, they got the genocide right, and they got right the fact that 1,200 people approximately did find sanctuary in a major hotel. What they got wrong is Don Cheadle. Well, not Don Cheadle, but the guy Don Cheadle is playing, is the manager of the hotel. When the manager of the hotel today is introduced, when he goes speaking, and he does go speaking, and makes quite a lot of money doing so. I believe his going rate now is about $15,000 a speech. He claims that he single-handedly saved all 1,200 people. No, he didn't. But I'll go into that in more detail as we go through this presentation, and I'll tell you who saved them. Now, when I talk about the pejorative Hollywood, and I talk about how I don't believe, as a parent, it should be used in classrooms to teach. Here's another movie, and this is, again, a very, very good movie. And nothing really nefarious here with regards to this particular film. Some of you may have seen it. It's about a historically black college back in the early part of the 20th century that formed a debating team, which was led by Denzel Washington. He was much younger then. And they got very, very good and eventually competed in a debating championship against Harvard University. Well, again, this is supposed to be a true story, and it basically is, except for one major thing. It wasn't Harvard. It was the University of Southern California, which is a very good school. Unfortunately, most Americans really only know USC for its football team, which is a very good football team. So the filmmakers knowingly said, nah, we'll change it to Harvard, because when you say Harvard, everybody thinks, wow, really intelligent people there. And you have the whole David and Goliath story. But again, this is Hollywood fudging the facts, and they didn't come right out and admit to this, but when confronted, the filmmaker said, oh yeah, you caught us. This is another great movie, and it was based on a great book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Lincoln. Now, the big dramatic point in this particular film is when they take a vote on the constitutional amendment to eliminate slavery. Well, they go through the roll call, and that's when all the tension mounts. And the filmmakers decided to fudge the roll call vote. The reasons why is I believe they did not want to make it look like all the northern states were against slavery and all the southern states were for slavery. So they had Connecticut, poor little Connecticut, in the north voting in favor of slavery. Well, Connecticut today didn't like that. And I believe the state legislature got together and sent their displeasure to the filmmakers, Mr. Spielberg. And now when you get the DVD or Blu-ray of this film, they now did a voiceover and they changed the vote. Now, what's ridiculous about this is, when Hollywood, again, has some sort of an agenda to change facts and not really tell us they're changing the facts until we call them on it. And here's something that is so easily checked. Now, as opposed to the Denzel Washington movie, this is a little more of an obscure historical thing. This is not obscure. We all know Abraham Lincoln. And we can look up the votes on constitutional amendments. So this was so easy to fact check, and yet they fudged it anyway. Again, these films tend to use words like based on and inspired. This is actually one of my favorite qualifiers. I don't know if any of you saw this movie recently. The exact wording that they use is some of this stuff actually happened. I really believe they should have put that at the beginning of Hotel Rwanda. Now this movie, some of you may have seen it, is loosely, and I do mean very loosely, based on the abscam scandal of the late 1970s. As you can certainly tell by the clothing worn by the stars there, that's definitely late 1970s clothing. So anyway, you would never, luckily, bring this into a classroom to teach about abscam. Back to Hotel Rwanda. This is a really fantastic book, and it was probably the earliest book written for the popular press regarding that genocide in 1994, written by a fellow who I'm happy to call a friend, Philip Garevich. Philip was working for the New Yorker, and he went to Rwanda, and he was there very shortly after the genocide had ended. And this book is really over the entire expanse of the genocide, very much like Stephen Kinzer's fine book also covered that. But of course, Kinzer's working now from a more recent viewpoint. Today it's 20 years after, I believe Stephen's book came out about 2 years ago, perhaps. But this was right fresh after it happened. And this was actually the first place where there was any mention of the Hotel Mille Collines and the people who survived in there. It also mentioned by name the hotel manager, Paul Rusesabagina. Now, in this book, and I talked to Philip also off the record, well, on my record, but not in his book, about what he learned about the hotel. He started meeting a few people who survived the genocide, who told him that they all congregated in this hotel. And it was one of the larger congregations of people who had found safety somewhere. Otherwise, there were people who were just off by themselves, here, there, hiding in the hills, what have you. But 1,200 people, that was actually a fairly good-sized grouping. So once he interviewed a handful of them, he did seek out the hotel manager. Now, none of the people that Philip spoke with ever said that the reason they were saved was because of the hotel manager. They never said it to him, nor does it appear in this book, which is alleged to be part of the inspiration for the movie. Even when Philip actually interviewed Paul Rusesabagina back in 1996, when he was doing this book, Rusesabagina did not claim to Philip Garevich that he saved anyone. there was a lot of talk of we. Well, in other words, Philip would ask, well, how did you people survive? And Paul would say, well, we did this, we did that, we did this. And it was always the papal we. There was really not much I, which is unfortunately how he represents everything today. I did everything all by myself. But this book is, again, a very good basis to learn about what happened there. Now, this is Paul Rusesabagina on the left, and that's Don Cheadle, who played him in the movie, on the right. Now, for as much as Rusesabagina was truthful, it would appear, when he was speaking with Philip Gurevich, he was less truthful when Hollywood came calling. Now, why was he truthful to Gurevich? I asked Philip that myself, and he said, most likely, he says, I was getting a lot of candor from people because they were used to people coming in who were from daily newspapers or even weeklies. So they would always ask, well, when is this coming out? And they would expect you to say, oh, it's going to be in tomorrow's paper, or it's going to be in this weekend's paper. Philip was working on this, as a New Yorker piece, and he said, oh, at best it's going to come out in maybe 6 months. Well, they laughed. Once you've come through a genocide, talking about 6 months into the future is kind of a crazy concept. That's something maybe we can't appreciate here in America. But to a Rwandan in 1995, 96, 6 months was a lifetime. And so for that reason, they tended to be, fairly honest with him, at least he felt so. Now, and they also, of course, were not getting any money for their testimony. Now, on the other hand, two gentlemen, one by the name of Keir Pearson from Harvard, who is a graduate of Harvard University, and Terry George, who would later go on to win an Academy Award. He's a film director, and he would take credit as the co-screenwriter of Hotel Rwanda. Went looking to track down this story and try to use it as a microcosm for the genocide. The first person they ran into was Paul Rusesabagina. Why? Well, if you're going to go to Rwanda and or you're going to go somewhere, I should say, specifically they found him in Belgium because he was driving a cab there. Rusesabagina actually left Rwanda in late 1996, and he's hardly been back at all since. So they called the company that owned the hotel, which is a Belgian company, and they asked, are any of the employees, do you still have contact information? They said yes. They gave him the phone number for Rusesabagina in Brussels. They tracked down him in Brussels, and he has this rapt audience, and he suddenly changes his story, and everything is I saved everybody all by myself. Now, I can imagine that a lot of us might have a temptation to do something like this, to play the hero. But with that goes also a lot of responsibility. Also, there is responsibility on behalf of the filmmakers to fact check. Unfortunately, Hollywood is not journalism, and this is one of my particular pet peeves about this movie and the use of any Hollywood film in the classroom. Documentaries are one thing. Usually they are held to a higher journalistic standard. Usually things do have to get fact-checked in a documentary. Certainly books that are used in academia are usually fact-checked. But films, not fact-checked. Now, the filmmakers claim that they spoke to 50 other survivors from the hotel. We've pressed them over and over to give us the names. They've ended up giving us about 3 or 4 names, one of which is Rusesabagina. We've actually talked to the other people that they named. They deny that he single-handedly, and this is the famous quote that's used when he goes out speaking today, single-handedly saved 1,250 people in the Hotel Mil Khalin. So here's their only witnesses, all saying, no, didn't happen. One of those people is a woman named Odette, who was actually depicted in the film. Odette was an advisor on the film. She saw the shooting script. She went to Terry George and said, "This is not at all what happened. This script is baloney." To which Terry George specifically said, "It's a film. It's not a documentary. It is supposed to be fiction." Now, a true story. That's supposed to be fiction. One of these things is a lie. And I think you could tell which particular statement I believe is the lie, and it's not this one. You may, oh, by the way, have you all seen the movie? I hope most of you have. If you haven't, a lot of this may be lost on you, and I hope I'm not boring you if by chance you haven't seen the film yet. Again, very entertaining film. This is the second most popular, largest character within the film, played by Nick Nolte. It's supposed to be a Canadian military man who's part of the UN peacekeeping force, and he is known in the film as Colonel, oh my gosh, I just totally lost it. It doesn't matter, it's a made-up name. This is the real person that Nick Nolte's playing. His name I remember, Romeo Dallaire. Romeo Dallaire was a general, not a colonel, and he was the leader of the peacekeeping forces in Rwanda during the genocide. You can see the resemblance. Now, second largest role in the film. Filmmakers claiming they spoke to 50 people to verify the true story of what happened in the hotel. What if I told you that this gentleman was never approached by the filmmakers? Why? Well, I certainly can tell you from having spoken to him that had they shown him their shooting script, he would have torn it in pieces. He very much does not like the film, to say the least. Not very pleased at all with his depiction. Denies certain things from the film, such as that there was never a friendship or relationship at all between himself and the hotel manager. Certainly said he never was hanging out and drinking with him, and so on and so forth. But when your second leading character in a movie is alive, and you have an opportunity to chat with him, fact check with him, and you refuse to do so, there's got to be a reason that you're not going to him. And our contention is that the filmmakers definitely knew that if they had tipped him off in advance about the film, he would definitely make them have to change the entire script, which is something they probably did not want to do because, again, they had a very entertaining movie. Because if you think of it purely in terms of art, Hotel Rwanda is like a Die Hard film. I mean, really, it could have starred Bruce Willis if he was African American. Simply because it's all about this one little guy up against people that are heavily armed and screaming in the face of generals and standing up to them and protecting everybody. This is a great, wonderful, way to put together a film that's going to entertain people. Unfortunately, again, it's not true, and this gentleman would have set them straight that it wasn't true, and I think they were already set on the storyline the way they wanted to tell it. So the film comes out, and the little man driving a taxi in Brussels is getting awards from everyone who also neglected to fact check any of the information. And this is sad, because this continues to go on to this very day. I'd say about every 6 months, somebody gives this man an award for single-handedly saving everyone, which is, again, something you will find nowhere except in this Hollywood movie. He wrote his own book 2 years after the film came out. But other than that, so in other words, our only source of information is him telling everybody he's a hero. Wow, I'd like to do that someday. If I had no ethics. Now, Paul Rusesabagina today has been compared to Oskar Schindler. And the movie is very much compared to Schindler's List, another fine film by Mr. Steven Spielberg again. Now, what I found interesting as I was working on our book about Hotel Rwanda is when that comparison with Schindler came up, I was surprised that there is a lot of people out there that were very vociferous in telling me that Schindler wasn't that great a guy. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on this particular subject of Oskar Schindler. Certainly, there were a lot of people who refer to themselves as Schindler Jews, who say that, yes, he saved their lives. But a surprising number, and this I discovered in this process, claimed that no, that was not the case. Actually, Philip Gorevich told me this because he has relatives that were Holocaust survivors who told them they knew Oskar Schindler, and again, he was not a nice guy who saved their lives. The thing is, though, the Schindler discussion is purely academic. Schindler's dead. What does it matter? I mean, it matters maybe for the historic record, but it's not going to really change anyone's life, whether he was the hero, he was not the hero. On the other hand, Paul Rusesabagina is very much alive. I like to compare Hotel Rwanda very much to this very famous film. If you're familiar with it, and if you're not, you definitely have to see this. The most famous line from the man who shot Liberty Valance is, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." In this film, Jimmy Stewart is alleged to have shot Liberty Valance, who's a bad guy, played by Lee Marvin. And he actually didn't shoot him. It was John Wayne. Of course it's John Wayne. It's always John Wayne who shoots the bad guy. But Jimmy Stewart uses his fame in shooting the bad guy to then get a political career going. Well, guess what? Since Hotel Rwanda has come out, Paul Rusesabagina is now a political figure. He's not only gotten very, very, very wealthy from the film, but he's now trying to take over the nation of Rwanda based on a Hollywood movie that was never fact-checked. Something that I was able to share from my research with Philip Gorevich that he did not even know, he didn't think to ask when he was interviewing Rusesabagina back in '96, was that Rusesabagina, though he claims and portrays himself as an apolitical person, is very much a political person and always has been. Prior to the genocide and during the genocide, he was a member of a political party known as MDR Power, which was one of the genocidaire parties. He was an officer in a political party that favored the genocide. Even Philip didn't know this. So this is the fellow who a couple of filmmakers decided to turn into a living saint. In the movie, it is made to look like he kind of hangs out with powerful people and uses that as a way to save the 1,200 people within his hotel. The truth was, those were really his pals, the people who were leading the genocide. He has, in fact, even given testimony in international court supporting those people who led the genocide. A lot of people don't know this, but this is public record. It's going on today. He speaks on behalf of the people who planned and ran the genocide. Why do they turn to him? Well, again, they're looking to get off, and here's a Hollywood hero who's coming to their aid saying, "Nah, this is a good guy, trust me." So Hollywood took a legend, and legend is another way of saying lie, and printed it as fact. A lot of people ask then, well, if it wasn't the hotel manager who saved everyone at the hotel, then how were they saved? There are really 4 reasons. The hotel itself was a UN-protected site. Now, much has been made of the fact that the UN peacekeeping force was rather paltry during the genocide, and that's absolutely true. But they did manage to have their headquarters they had an office right there at the hotel. The United Nations flag flew over the hotel. Even within the film, you will see vehicles marked UN all over the hotel. Strangely enough, if you listen to the DVD commentary where Paul Rusesabagina narrates over the film, he says right before he goes to the hotel, he is accosted in the film by a military man, and he says, oh, I'm just going into the hotel to get some money. And they said, oh no, you're going to go over there and get protected by the UN. This is a line from the film. In the DVD commentary, Rusesabagina laughs at that line and says, ha ha, there wasn't even UN there. Yes, there were. They had their offices there. They had people there at all times. The hotel was a center for diplomacy. Now, the international community was aware of what was going on in Rwanda. Maybe they weren't making public statements, but ambassadors and representatives of various nations were coming to Rwanda. Well, where were they coming to specifically? Guess what? They all came to the same place, the Hotel Mille Collines. Now, if you're committing a genocide and you're denying that you're committing a genocide, because that's kind of bad for business, because eventually it will end and eventually you're going to have to do business with the rest of the world. You can't just start hacking up people right in front of the ambassador of Germany. So, when the ambassador of Germany and the ambassador from Luxembourg and so on and so forth would come to Rwanda, they were coming into this hotel, and when they would talk to the leaders of the genocide and chastise them about the genocide, the leaders would say, look around you, look around, look, there's a Tutsi, look, that woman, that guy over there, they're all Tutsi, and look, we're not killing them, they're all alive. That's another reason they lived. The hotel was considered a showpiece for the leaders of the interim government to try to prove there was no genocide going on. Now, something I'll really mention here, and if you're talking about true heroes, one of my favorites, and I will certainly say that Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian general with the UN, is definitely a hero in my book, because he certainly helped save the lives of the people in this hotel. As far as diplomats, there is a gentleman Bernard Kouchner. He is one of the founders of Doctors Without Borders. Kouchner, at the time of the genocide, he's a fellow who's been involved in French politics for decades and has held various major positions within the French government at different times. And France was actually the only Western power who was very, very actively involved in the genocide, unfortunately on the wrong side. If you want to know where the people got all those machetes that they used during the genocide, thank France. And you want to know who trained them how to use the machetes? France. This is France's dirty little secret. Unfortunately, if you look into almost any genocide, you will find that there's some other world power that has tended to back the bad guys. In this case, it was France. But back to Kouchner. Kouchner, at the time of the genocide, was not actually in an official position with the French government, but he was famous. I would probably compare him to, say, Hillary Clinton today. Right now, we all know who she is. Everyone in the world stage knows who she is, but she's no longer Secretary of State, she's no longer a senator, she's no longer First Lady. So if she just shows up at the Japanese embassy, they're still going to open their doors to her and take her quite seriously, even though she technically is, again, not in office. Kouchner was not in office, but on his own, he went to the hotel and sat across from the leaders of the genocide there. And it was Kushner who got in their face and said, I am going to get the names of every single person here, and I'm going to come back, and I won't tell you when, and I'll come back again, and I'll come back again, and they better all be alive. Edward, my co-author, was there at that meeting. There was a committee formed of the refugees who were at the hotel. It was that refugee committee who was meeting with international diplomats, who was interfacing with the Red Cross and so on and so forth, interfacing with the UN. The hotel manager, in fact, none of the hotel employees were ever involved in the refugee committee, and that never interfaced with any of those entities. But Kushner, again, because he was French, carried such sway with the leaders of the genocide, who all assumed he was representing Paris. They were scared of him. And so when he came there and said, I'm getting the names and I'm coming back, he protected their lives. He is somebody they should have done the film about. Hostage exchange. What happened toward the end of their stay in the hotel, when we got into the month of, at the end of May, beginning of June, of the genocide that began at the beginning of April. As I mentioned, there was a civil war going on. The RPF army of Tutsis and moderate Hutu were coming in from Uganda, and they were making progress. They were starting to win the war. In fact, they reached a point where they started taking a lot of prisoners of war. And at one point they had thousands of them. Well, why do we take prisoners of war when we're at war? It's usually used for some sort of gain. In this particular case, it's often used to exchange prisoners. Well, at this point in time, the leaders of the genocide said, wow, they've got a lot of our people now, the RPF army does. What do we have to give them to get our people back? Oh, wait a minute. There's all those Tutsi in that hotel. I've got it. We'll take them to the RPF side, which was now safe, and we'll get our people back. And that's exactly what happened. When you see in the film that the trucks are pulling away and the people in the hotel are reaching safety, they were actually involved in a hostage exchange. Now, even before the exchange happened, about 2 weeks, 3 weeks prior to that, there was already discussions about that hostage exchange. So again, in addition to the UN protecting them, the diplomats protecting them, now there was another reason that the genocide leaders had for keeping these particular people alive. If they were dead, you can't use a dead body in a hostage exchange. You need a live body. And of course, finally, the fourth reason that the people survived who were in the hotel is eventually the RPF did win the war and end the genocide. So I had mentioned that today, and this really speaks to the final point of why our book is important today. Paul Rusesabagina, again, is a political figure today. He is the voice and the face of all the opposition parties who seek to overthrow President Paul Kagame of Rwanda. Most of those people who are looking to overthrow that government have had some sort of a history with the prior regime. In other words, the regime that committed the genocide. A lot of the people who committed the genocide are still at large. Most of them are in eastern Congo, and they formed an army called the FDLR. The FDLR has been named a terrorist organization both by the United States and the UN. Paul Rusesabagina calls them freedom fighters. The UN has recently tried to move in actively into the eastern Congo to disarm FDLR. Rusesabagina has put out a giant op-ed saying, please do not disarm them. Now, when the UN calls an organization a terrorist organization, the same way that we refer to ISIS or Al-Qaeda, imagine if there's some fellow out there going, don't disarm Al-Qaeda, don't disarm ISIS. That's probably not a really swell fellow. But again, this is the particular politics of a man who is only famous for one reason, because a bunch of guys in Hollywood decided to sell popcorn with a movie. He is also now being referred to as a denier of the genocide. And this is an exact quote from an interview he gave, which is, we have to call it genocide because we can never change it. We have to maybe wait for another resolution. Genocide is declared by virtue of UN resolution. And the UN did, in fact, in '94, finally, at the end of the genocide, they called it a genocide. And they passed a resolution to that fact. The exact words of Paul Rusesabagina are, again, we have to wait for another resolution to no longer call it a genocide. So, this is what Hollywood does to history. And this is an unfortunate situation and something that hopefully we'll never see again, and I don't believe there's many examples of us having seen it prior to this particular movie. Because again, when Hollywood has botched history, or even maybe taken a controversial stance on history, in a case such as Oskar Schindler, again, they were dealing with someone who was dead. It's a very, very dangerous thing when Hollywood elevates any living person to sainthood, and they haven't fact-checked at all. Hollywood is a very powerful thing. Unfortunately, it's an unchecked power. Do we have any questions? I'd like to open up the floor. Questions? Yes, in the back?
So what can we do if we want to prevent these things from happening? We want the truth to come out.
Well, for one thing, we're really, the Rwandans that are here in America and elsewhere have really tried to get the word out to these different organizations that are inviting Rusesabagina and giving him awards, which is, again, still going on. They're trying to alert these organizations. Unfortunately, they usually don't find out about it until it's already announced. So let's just say there's some, it could have been University of Scranton for that matter. I mean, maybe they would decide they're going to have him as a commencement speaker or something. Well, once that's done, unfortunately, and the flack starts to come from, and it's mostly Rwandans themselves, who usually get in touch with the organization and say, hey, let me tell you the true story about this fellow. Usually the organization doesn't want to have egg on its face, and they'll usually dig their heels in because they don't want the embarrassment of disinviting someone or, taking back an award. This is unfortunate because, again, doesn't the truth matter? I would think the truth matters more than saving face for your organization. So this is what's going on, and certainly the more people that put pressure on organizations and try to alert them that, hey, this is not the fellow who you think it is, it would certainly be an improvement over the way things are going on now. Because again, it just keeps building up his public profile and building it up and building it up. And today, when he goes out and speaks, he doesn't even talk about the genocide anymore. He really just gets up and does a political stump speech on how terrible Rwanda is today. What he doesn't tell anyone is he hasn't even been there since 1996. He went back one time. He went back with the film crew from Hotel Rwanda to shoot a little mini documentary, and that he was there for about a week. That's all the time he spent in Rwanda. And yet he does put himself out there as an alleged expert on present-day Rwanda. He even was in the UK speaking as an expert witness in the trial of some genocide heirs who were being deported from England back to Rwanda to stand trial. And when the barristers got him on the stand and asked him to prove his expertise on the current affairs going on in Rwanda today, they ended up just laughing him out of the courtroom because, again, he knows, I mean, he's just never even there. So it's an unfortunate series of events. Any other questions? Yes.
Is there any organization outside of the government, a non-governmental organization inside Rwanda that is trying to get the story, the real, true story out?
Well, I mean, again, he's taken on Kagame, so Kagame and, his RPF party in Rwanda have denounced the film and denounced Rusesabagina. But unfortunately now that's just turned into, everybody's claiming, oh, well, that's just politics. It'd be the same as, if there's, we have a Democrat in the White House now and, Republicans, attack him and that goes back and forth and everybody says, oh, that's politics. And since Rusesabagina is hoping to perhaps be the next president of Rwanda because of this movie. Now, again, can you imagine somebody puts together a Hollywood movie and then takes a guy from driving a cab and makes him president of a country? It really seems like something you ought to make a movie of, just about the hilarity of that. But yeah, the nation of Rwanda itself has denounced the film, denounced Rusesabagina, but again, he will deflect and say, oh, that's just politics. As far as any other organizations, all the survivor organizations, the legitimate survivor organizations, such as SURF, such as Ibuka, these are the NGOs that are really trying to take care of the survivors of the genocide. They have all denounced him because he has never given a penny of all the money he's gotten, has never 1 cent gone to Rwanda. He has founded his own foundation called the Hotel Rwanda Rusesabagina Foundation, which was alleged to be raising money for genocide orphans. They have never tracked a penny of it going to Rwanda. And he has even stated publicly he has never sent any money to Rwanda since prior to the film being made. He puts it in his pocket because he's actually changed. I really hope the IRS goes after him for this at some point. But now, if you go to his website, he now says that he raises money to raise awareness. Well, he's already getting paid to give speeches anyway, but now he also has a philanthropy, which is again to give himself money to go out and talk to people about how bad things are in Rwanda today. So yeah, he has a foundation for himself. He raises money for himself as a charity. Sir.
Has anyone ever gone after Spielberg about this, and has Spielberg in any way replied?
Spielberg did not do Hotel Rwanda. Terry George did.
Oh, okay, Terry did.
Terry George, yeah. Well, certainly we've gone after him, but he's avoided us like the plague. He won't talk to me. He's taken pot shots at me and my co-author in Huffington Post. Our book was excerpted in Newsweek, and then he shot back at us. But we've offered to debate him face-to-face on the facts. But again, he won't even talk to us. He won't share a stage with us. Yes?
Has your research in producing the book come to any conclusion as to the rule of Kagame then and now?
Well, let me say this. My co-author would be probably regarded as a Kagame supporter, okay? And that does come through in our book. But we've tried to be very clear about what the mission of this book is, which is not to specifically talk about Paul Kagame. And when I go out and do these speaking events, and when Edouard does the same. Sometimes I have to talk to people. There will oftentimes be someone in the audience who is a Kagame hater, and and my attitude toward that is, okay, fine, that's all right. And I have a problem, though. It's like our book is not about Kagame per se. It's about Rusesabagina. It's about this movie. And when Rusesabagina attacks Kagame and Kagame haters then support him, I like to say, look, can we separate out the two issues? Our issue is this guy is famous for something he did not do. Now, maybe you agree with his politics, because maybe you don't like Paul Kagame. That's fine. But can we separate it out? And instead of having an argument where, like, well, because I like his politics, well, then he's also got to have done this other thing, even though I can't prove it. So I try to split that. And again, if you really want to learn more about, Kagame and so on, I would recommend other books are much better than ours, because that was never our mission going in. Yes, sir.
Is Edouard himself politically involved in Rwanda?
Well, he lives in America now. He moved here 2002, I believe. He moved to the U.S. He lives in Columbus, Ohio, and he's married, has a family there. So, I mean, he's part of the, expat community, of Rwandans here in the U.S. And as I said, has represented to me that he does support President Kagame. It's funny, in a lot of conversations I've had with Rwandans, and I've been able to make a lot of Rwandan friends since the book has come out, and I cherish those friendships, so many good people. And it's funny, because some of them will say, well, I really wish Kagame do this or do that, or not do this or not do that. But they generally tend, at least the ones that I know, have tended to support him because they say, well, listen, he's not perfect, but we've seen the alternative. And certainly when you've gone through from 1959 to 1994 with political leadership that was so incredibly hostile to a large portion of the populace, to the point that they eventually started slaughtering that portion of the populace, it kind of makes a pretty easy decision for you politically as to who you're going to support. Now, eventually, I think there's going to be more opposition parties in Rwanda that will develop that will, be not a choice between the old regime and the present regime, but maybe, with regards to peace-loving Rwandans who are currently living there, eventually are going to, put up different candidates and so on. And it's going to be a choice not between good and bad, but between good and good and good. And I think that would be a positive thing when that occurs. Anyone else? Yes.
Do you feel like Hollywood representation of what happened represents the U.S. community in the sense that this genocide that was happening, we took a person who's not a good person and made him this hero? It's almost a mockery of genocide in that sense. Do you feel that represents the U.S. community?
I didn't hear the last part of your, the very last thing you said. Do I think?
Do you feel like Hollywood represented the U.S. almost poorly because of the fact that they took Tina and made him into this hero, and because the movie actually was, in a sense, go copycat some of the genocide leaders? Do you feel like it's almost like a mockery in that sense of what actually happened?
Well, Terry George's politics, which kind of speak to the film. Terry George really has it in for Bill Clinton, who was the United States president at the time of the genocide, and he's blasted Clinton in many speeches he's given, Terry George. But at the same time, I must also say Clinton has apologized profusely for being asleep at the switch during the genocide and not doing what he could have done. And there's no question that the film does have an undercurrent of criticism of Clinton for not getting involved there. So, and Terry George, by the way, is Irish. He's not an American. Keir Pearson is American. So it's, that is the situation with the people who made the film. So.
Thank you, Kerry.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you.
I want to thank Kerry I can't imagine. I'm one of those people who is so curious about and interested in this tiny country in Africa because it is very interesting. But I also want for you to have time to buy a book, which Kerry will sign for you. So I wanted to stop because of that. Thank you so much. Remember, I hope to see you next Monday and next Wednesday. And one other little announcement. Mark has just told us that there's going to be a Schemel festival for, is it 24 hours over the Thanksgiving weekend of all Schemel on ECTV. So I know you'll have nothing else to do on that day. Is it going to be on, do you know which day it's going to be on?
Thanksgiving Day.
Oh, Thanksgiving Day. Okay. Well, there you go. Thank you all.